Hello, everyone. I'm Mystery.
And I am Bolton Mortimer, otherwise known as the Authenticator, and we are the Duality of Man.
Today, we're talking about the duality of man and fiction. We talked about art last week, and since I
It just
firmly
seemed
believe,
like a natural, organic progression because I don't know if you guys have noticed, if you've been living under a rock the size of a planet, but those who mangle the concept of art are also committing an occupation assault on every meaningful IP or franchise that anyone has ever loved for like the last 100 years or more.
yeah, and a lot of these IPs are made by men, great men who made fantastic stories, but are now being bought out and ruined by corporations who don't have a creative soul amongst them.
Well, that and a authoritarian, puritanical, moralistic ideology that says that meritocracy is a sinful illusion and must be eradicated, and that art must always be viewed as a means to an end, like we talked about last week.
Also, I think it's a lack of respect. They don't view anything as sacred.
Well,
View
because they
they
don't
don't they don't
they
have
don't
respect for the creation of somebody else.
because they don't view anything as having intrinsic value. Everything is only valuable in a utilitarian what does it do, what is its function, what can it do for me sort of way. um which is a lot of what we talked about last week, because of course most fiction is an extension or a subcategory of art, and especially art that has narrative elements that involve a world or characters. Um, because of that complexity, because of that function as an extension of human nature and reality, it's all the more meaningful for them to try to make it conform to their ideology. Um, the
Yeah.
the
I think
occupation troops, as I previously mentioned, basically.
yeah, I think currently the most obvious example of this is Amazon's Lord of the Rings: Rings of Power. Now, if you actually look at the show and the substance of it, you will barely see any resemblance to the world and characters created by J.R.R. Tolkien. What you will see, however, is a bunch of ideological crap that was never in any of Tolkien's stories, and
Well, it
characters that bear no resemblance outside of the most surface level connection.
also it goes even further than that with Tolkien, because in many ways, what they replaced the, for lack of a better word, thematic structure of Tolkien with is directly antithetical to Tolkien. Because for those that don't know, the origin story of Middle Earth, of Arda, as it's called, um, involves essentially um, reality slowly being assaulted and corrupted by attempts to modernize it and make it more efficient. First, you had the Dark Lord Melkor, who wanted the flame imperishable, the ability to create life from Eru Ilúvatar, who was essentially the surrogate for the monotheistic god in Middle Earth. And he was refused the gift of the flame imperishable. So he decided that instead of finding a place in the grand plan of Eru Ilúvatar, he was going to make it his mission to create the things he wanted to create by distorting things that already existed in the world. And then, of course, Melkor recruited a Maiar by the name of Mairon, who one day would be referred to instead as Sauron, whose main goal in life was to make the world more efficient. And so Melkor was like, well, if Eru doesn't want the world to be more efficient, then you and I should just take it over and make it more efficient in our way. Thus, what you essentially have in Middle Earth is a story about how the forces of good are nostalgic for bygone elder days where divinity still shone on the world, and the forces of evil are utilitarian, technological, mechanical materialists who want to make the world as scientifically efficient as possible and progress the world accordingly. Who does this sound like, ladies and gentlemen? That that
Yeah.
that's that's the fundamental irony of it. I read an article recently about there was this guy who was trying to conflate the forces of evil in Tolkien's mythos with the people who had a problem with Rings of Power, and they kept saying how progress was a positive force in Tolkien's mythos, and I was sitting there going, you didn't pay attention at all. All the good characters are nostalgic for bygone days of purity and unspoiled innocence, and all the evil characters are all about that scientific progress and that technologicalization. Like,
Not only did Melkor um, do it out of a desire to create, he also did it out of spite. He did it out of malice. He wanted to take the things that people loved and twist them, not just to serve his own purpose, but also to spit in their face.
Daddy won't let me make things from scratch, so I'll just make my own things with his things, grr. This is a slight sidebar, but Melkor is a perfect example of why I very often find it hard to take Abrahamic devil characters seriously, because when you get right down to it, the devil is just a spoiled brat who wants to break daddy's things. When you get right down to the nitty gritty of it, the devil is just pouting and breaking things because daddy wouldn't give him enough attention.
How many of those have we seen in the world?
I mean, there's a lot of them. I'm not saying it's not true. I'm just saying that for all of the gothic horror of demons and devils, when you get right down to it, it's really just an archangel with daddy issues throwing a temper tantrum. And Melkor, as a surrogate for the devil in Tolkien's mythos, is very much the same way. It's just an archangel throwing a temper tantrum because daddy wouldn't love him enough and wouldn't give him what he asked for.
And let's not forget that Melkor, he tried to screw over the elves and the Valar once before, and they locked him up. And then they forgave him. They were willing to give him a second chance, but then he screwed them over again, less subtly at first. He started by corrupting, I believe it's Feanor.
Well, I mean, the first sort of failure of Melkor was while the Valar and the Maiar were singing to create the world to begin with. The one of the most tragic aspects of Tolkien's mythos is no matter how well the forces of good do to try and maintain and preserve what's good, or try to return things to their elder status, they're always going to fail to some degree because Melkor screwed the plan in the blueprint stages because they were trying to sing the world into existence, and Melkor A was the strongest of the Valar and therefore was able to sing the loudest, and B deliberately sang out of tune to
But
ruin
didn't
things.
Eru Iluvatar say that that was also part of his plan because I knew you would do that?
Well, yeah, I mean that's the other sort of sad thing about devil characters and the sort of I'm not sure if I'm on either side portion of the program, because it's like if God made everything, he also made the devil, and presumably he made the devil to rebel because otherwise he wouldn't. Because angels don't really have free will as far as we know. We know humans were gifted with that, but there's nothing in the scriptures that say the angels were gifted with that. So he made he made the devil essentially to be the fall guy. It seems in a lot of ways.
Let's get back to Tolkien. So after Melkor was released the first time, they forgave him and gave him another chance. But then he corrupts.
Because they just couldn't understand why anyone would deliberately do evil. They were
Yeah,
confused by this notion of like what is it? What is this lying thing? Why would anyone do that? That sounds stupid. No one would be that stupid.
yeah, and so he starts whispering falsehoods to the prince of the elves, Fëanor, and then he goes out, I believe, to Middle Earth and finds like this like monstrous spider creature from the void of the universe called Ungoliant that literally eats light, brings it
She
back to Valinor, and
yeah.
kills the trees that gave Valinor its light because the sun hadn't
Ac-
been created yet.
according to some of the unfinished tales, um Ungoliant isn't from Middle Earth. She's literally the embodiment of the darkness outside of existence. And again, according to what little we know of Tolkien's thoughts on this, because unfinished tales, apparently Ungoliant and Eru both existed like from the primordial uh essence of existence. It's kind of like God and Amara from Supernatural almost.
Yeah. So like he finds this monstrous primordial being of pure darkness and says, I can use this.
Yeah, it's like I know where you can get a snack, and then going, it's just like okay, and yeah,
Yes,
they team up for basically no reason other than again Melkor is a pouting brat, and Ungoliant is just Ungoliant just wants Eru to turn out the light and thought that the creation of existence was stupid. So
yeah,
evil creatures in Tolkien's mythos are very, very petty things. When you like, apart from obviously they're very gothic and very operatic in their mannerisms and stuff. But when you get right down to it, Eru just wants to break Daddy's toys because Daddy wouldn't give him the power to create things of his own, and Ungoliant just wants existence to stop existing because turn out that light, goddammit.
yeah. So the elves. So after Morgoth kills the trees that give the world its light, he steals these three basically hallowed gems that were created called the Silmarils.
Yeah,
And
the most beautiful craft ever created by any living creature, basically.
yeah, and so a lot of the elves follow him across the sea east to Middle Earth.
Even though
And
they were told not to because the Valar didn't want to lose the elves because the elves were Eru's prized children.
well, it wasn't all of them.
No, but I'm just again, it's this notion in Tolkien's mythos that like the past and the unspoiled miraculous part of nature is something we can never return to, and like it's almost a tragic predestined to fall by way of progress thing. Even Feanor's attempt to craft the Silmarils is sort of framed as a bad thing because it's him trying to confine the light of the two trees of Valinor because he fears that one day they will be gone. Now, granted, he was right to fear that. Um, Also, by the way, it was the beauty of Galadriel's hair that inspired the creation of the two Silmarils. But never you mind, writers of the Rings of Power. Just turn her from this wise, ethereal, eldritch creature into Buffy the Vampire Slayer Medieval Edition, why don't you? It's fine.
Uh, let- let's talk about Galadriel and the way that she's presented. Um, in the books and in the Peter Jackson film, she is portrayed as this otherworldly beauty that when she's looked upon, like it's almost as if you're looking at something that is too pure for this world.
Yeah,
And you
she's
can see in
literally
Jackson,
almost divine in her own right. She's the it could be argued that she is the most pure of the elves, even. And considering how pure the elves are just default to begin with, that's pretty damn pure.
yeah. And if you look at the way she's portrayed in the Peter Jackson movies, like when she's talking at night with Frodo, she's glowing. Like,
She contains her own light. And this was something else that I feel the Rings of Power completely and utterly just fucked over beyond all reason for no good reason. Um, most of the powerful divine or quasi divine creatures within Tolkien's mythos interact with the world by way of their Theia, their inner light, and by using what are called words of command to alter the song of the Ainur that underpins all existence. Now, you keep this in mind for the elves because the strongest of the elves are almost as powerful as the divine beings, the Ainur and the Valar and the Maiar, and they can use their inner light and they can use words of command. And as such, it's actually considered primitive and debased and almost lower class for an elf to engage in physical combat. That's why the elders of the elves don't really engage directly in physical combat. They either enchant their weapons using that same magic, or they just use their inner light and their words of command to get things done.
yeah,
Now,
and in you have to remember that the elves did not even have weapons until Morgoth started whispering into the ears of Feanor. Like Feanor created the first arms and weapons, like for the elves after Melkor started
yeah,
trying to him to turn him against his brothers.
yep. Again, because Melkor is a very very transparent devil. The Eru Iluvatar created these divine beings known as the Ainur, which were subdivided into the Valar, which were the strongest ones, and the Maiar, which were the Valar are somewhere between polytheistic deities and archangels, and then the Maiar are sort of just angels. Um, and Melkor was the strongest of the Valar, but he was also an evil dick. Thus the problem.
Yeah, but um, getting back to Gladriel for just a minute, whenever you saw her in the movie, like I couldn't imagine like this woman getting a speck of dirt on her shoes. She just seemed like so perfect. But in the Rings of Power, she has none of that quality. You see her fighting, you see her covered in dirt, you see her, dripping from jumping in the water. Like she has no otherworldly quality to her.
And again, keeping this in mind, to the elves, physical combat is considered primitive and uncouth and like unworthy of elven behavior. That's why even though every single elven soldier is better than every single human soldier because the elves are just default better than every other mortal living creature, um, in terms of the hierarchy of elven society, it is considered more noble to interact with reality by using your Feia and your words of command rather than sullying your hands or sullying your eternal life by engaging in physical combat. That's why Legolas answers to someone like Aragorn or Galadriel because he is considered a lower class elf, and that's why they send That's why they're willing to send him along, because it's like, oh, he's just a soldier, so we're not going to be missing much if we send him.
Yeah. Even though I believe he is the prince of his kingdom.
Yeah, he. They made this clearer in the Peter Jackson Hobbit movie. Apparently, he's a wood elf. That didn't register to me when I read the book or when I saw the Lord of the Rings, but I guess that is at the very least the canon that Peter Jackson went with. And given how loyal Peter Jackson was to every other aspect of Tolkien's mythos, I'm willing to give him this. Like you get to make adjustments because you actually understand what you're doing, whereas whereas the people who and that also kind of has parallels in Tolkien's mythos, because despite being very opposed to Melkor having the flame imperishable and getting to make things, some of the other Valar, specifically, I forget the name of the one that deals primarily with nature, um, but there's that one who makes the Ents, and there's also Aule the Smith, who creates the dwarves by sculpting them out of clay. And when Eru saw that his children had actually had a good idea, he was willing to give those creatures the flame imperishable, which I'm sure made Melkor all the more of an edgy emo teenager, because when I asked to make things, you didn't want me to make things, but with Aule and again, whichever one is the one that make, I want to say it's Toolcast, the one that makes nature. But when those two made things, you gave them the power to give them life, and I do wonder how much of that was just you asked me to give you the power to make things without telling me what you wanted to make, versus your brothers went ahead and gave me a demonstration of what they wanted to make, and so I gave it to them.
Yeah.
I, I do
Because
I
the
do
thing is,
wonder maybe if Melkor had just been a little bit more proactive and demonstrated what he wanted to make, Eru would have just been like, yeah, okay.
there is one thing I thought other thing I want to mention. That is the casting. Because here's the thing. Uh, they cast the actress for Galadriel as looking way younger than the actor for Celebrimbor. The thing is, Celebrimbor is, I believe, younger than Galadriel. Celebrimbor is her second cousin. What you see, while Galadriel came over from the uttermost west to Middle Earth, along with Feanor and his sons, Celebrimbor, I believe, wasn't born until after they got there.
Also worth noting, elves don't age. They have a very brief childhood wherein they age up very quickly, and then they basically stay in the prime of their life physically for their entire lives.
Yeah, that's
And
why.
the only way they die is if their inner light, their Fea, their soul, fades from inside their body, which is why in uh, Fellowship of the Ring you hear Galadriel talking about how I shall go, I pass the test, I shall therefore fade and go into the west and diminish. That's what she's talking about. She's talking about the light of her soul slowly fading. Um, from inside her body. That's how elves die, if they can be said to die at all. So they don't age. They have a very brief childhood, and then they stay in the prime of their lives for the entire time of their existence. And by the time of the second age, Galadriel was already 2,000. So don't be telling me, well, maybe she's still in her childhood phase. No, because 2,000 years.
Yeah, and she certainly wouldn't look younger than Celebrimbor.
I think they were around the same age. To be fair, they're both second generation Noldor, from what I remember. But
I think no, I'm like I recently saw a bloodline chart, and Galadriel is the daughter of Feanor's brother, I believe, Fingolfin,
right,
where
right.
Celebrimbor is the son of one of Feanor's sons. So
Okay,
Galadriel
so
is one
so
generation
she
before.
is older. Okay, I did. I
Yeah,
yeah, it's been a while since I looked into the particular. I I just remembered that Galadriel and Celebrimbor were both fairly early on in Elven like hierarchy because the thing is the first generation of elves didn't have childhood at all. They were literally sculpted as adults and brought to life as adults. Um, whereas the second and third generation of elves obviously did have a childhood because they were born, for lack of a better word, naturally. But again, elves uh, childhoods are very short, and they remain in the prime of their life for the entire rest of their existence. The only one that you could feasibly get away with saying aged is Elrond because he is technically half elf. He is Elrond half elven, which it would
Yeah,
be nice
he
if they
chose to live
drew
as an
attention to
immortal,
that in a way that wasn't just Gurm oppression in Rings of Power, but they can't even so much as remember that soldier elves are lower class compared to sorcerer elves. So baby steps, I suppose.
Another thing I want to mention is the High Humans of Numenor, how they're portrayed in the show. The Numenorians are supposed to be extremely tall and extremely strong. Right now, they're shown as being like no more different size than your average human. And two, like they were shown in the show to be complaining about elves because
They took
Elvin
our
Smith can't get enough
jobs.
jobs in Numenor. He's like,
They took
why?
our jobs. Yeah, the reason why why Numenor falls. I shouldn't have to explain what I'm about to explain, but I will anyway. The reason why Numenor falls is because they fall into depravity and sorcery, um, thanks to the influence of Melkor and Sauron. Like it, they are to Middle Earth what Atlantis is to Atlantis or Camelot is to um, modern
To Western England.
to IRL civilization, basically.
And the thing is that one of the reasons they were jealous of the elves is because the Numenorians had very long lives for humans. Like
But they were
I believe
mortal.
Aragon, who was descended from them, lived to be like 200, but they
Yeah,
weren't but they weren't true immortals like the elves, and that's why they were jealous.
and to be fair, you can kind of lay blame on Eru for this one, um, because Eru essentially felt like um, mortality was a gift, and it was this alleged gift that Melkor was able to twist and be like, "Well, everyone else is immortal. Why don't you guys get to be immortal? Eru must hate you. You should come and work for me instead." Which which I understand. I understand the poetic nature of life has value when it's limited and everything. I understand that, but I'm gonna hate myself for this, but I'm gonna side with Melkor on this one because all the poetry in the world of immortality is valuable because it's limited and stuff is nice and all, but when everyone else around you is immortal, mortality really feels like someone doesn't like you.
I mean, I mean, I agree, but like the way they're portraying it in the Rings of Power, like it's not because my jobs, like
This is this isn't South Park Middle Earth edition. They took our jobs. It's supposed to be it's supposed to be again this bygone golden age that falls slowly into sorcery and depravity because of the idea of mechanization and progress, and God actually made a mistake. Which again, to be fair, there's an argument in the case of giving men mortality. What did you think was going to prioritize being immortal, and then they're going to want other kinds of power as well, and then along comes Melkor, which again, part of me wonders if that wasn't the scheme the whole time, because maybe Melkor was meant to be the fall guy. Maybe that's what he was made for, but that gets more into Lovecraftian territory and less Tolkienian, so we're not going to go there.
yeah, it's not like the elves didn't like have a relationship with Numenor. They did. They gave them a number of gifts. They gave them the Palantir, which I believe was created also by Feanor, the same guy who
Yeah,
made the Silver.
the Palantiri are supposedly also. Feanor was just good at crafting everything, and he would just randomly experiment with things to craft. And one of these obsessive autistic elf benches resulted in the Silmarils, and another one of these autistic elf benches of craftsmanship led to the creation of the uh, the Palantir. Apparently, it's never directly confirmed that he made them, but it basically is soft canon at this point that Feanor made the Palantir.
Yeah, and I believe like they show Numenor having a queen regent in the show. I'm pretty sure that Numenor was a male dynasty.
Well, no, there was a period where one king had been exiled and his wife had taken the uh, monarchy over, but it was very temporary, and they're not. There are two ways you can go with this. You can either go with the idea that Numenor being temporarily without a king is part of what led to the aforementioned sorcery, hedonism, and depravity, or you can make it not important. And I'm surprised that they're focusing so heavily on the generation of the Queen Regent, because there are several generations before Numenor is supposed to go nuclear. So making it her fault wouldn't make a hell of a lot of sense. And also, given the most social justice themes here, they're gonna either have to reframe her as being in the right and the king's being stupid. Which, have you learned nothing from Lord of the Rings and Return of the King? Like again, the famous steward authority is not given to you to deny the return of the king, and so on. Which they actually reference in one episode when Galadriel is telling the Queen Regent off for some fucking reason. Um, they make a reference to that line and is like, I will not deign to deal with you, Regent. And it's like, number one, again, Galadriel has existed for 2,000 years, and also Galadriel in the books was just wise by default. The one the one mistake that Galadriel is said to have made definitively is when Feanor was crafting the Silmarils, he asked to be given 3 strands of Galadriel's hair so he could put Galadriel's hair at the heart of the Silmarils, and she refused him. And she actually was so mortified by the consequences of this refusal, that she blamed herself for it for thousands of years thereafter.
Yeah, and that's why she ends up giving Gimli the dwarf when he asks for the only thing that I want because she was giving out gifts is the strand of your hair. She gives him three,
Yeah,
kind of in a
instead of the
representation of the
one that
three
he
times
asked
she
for,
refused
and
Fëanor.
all the elves like look sideways at each other like, did she just shit? like that was the reaction of the elves, because they all knew the backstory of this, and it was a seemingly small thing that had massive implications. At
Yeah,
that point, the elf dwarf war was basically over, because the elves were all like, "Well, fuck! If she's willing to give a dwarf 3 strands of her hair when she refused Feanor, I guess we can all be friends with dwarves now." Shit.
the thing is, her attitude in the show, like the kind of headstrong, kind of overly willful.
Yeah, they turn her into Xena Warrior Princess or Buffy the Vampire Slayer, despite the fact
That's
that
the kind of that's the kind of attitude I would expect from Fëanor. Like when like he was very headstrong, he was very willful.
yeah,
Like he wouldn't
he
allow
was
people to tell him
so
what to do.
yeah, he was the arrogant craftsman who thought he could do it better. and that's part of the reason why Melkor had such an easy time twisting him, because Melkor and Sauron and Feanor and basically every other evil character, up to and including Saruman, all had this attitude of the world is good as it is, unspoiled and divine, but we could make it better by making it more efficient, don't you know?
And
Like, and this is why I have such a problem with the progressivizing Tolkien, because in Tolkien's, like, in the world that Tolkien has crafted, themes are no frickin' themes. Progress is the negative force, and divine nostalgia is the positive force. All the good characters are always waxing lyrical about how good the old days were, and all the bad characters are always removing the unspoiled beauty of nature because it's getting in the way of my technology and my progress.
yeah, that's yeah. In the ending of the Lord of the Rings, Aragorn, after he ascends to the throne of Gondor, basically makes the Shire a protectorate of Gondor, basically making sure that with his authority, nobody would lay hands on the Shire, not only for his friends, but also to because it is an unspoiled land, and he wanted to protect it.
Now, granted, by the time he had done this, the damage was already kind of done because
Scouring the Shire,
Saruman
yes.
Came in and was like, "This Shire you have here is nice and all, but it would be better if we had factories in it." and, and to be fair, something else small that's worth noting here. Um, One of the reasons why Melkor recruited Sauron, or Myron as he was originally called, was because he was the strongest of the Maiar, and he was also under the tutelage of Aule the Smith, as was Kawumo, who would one day become known as Saruman. So both the Maiar that ended up going rogue and joining the side of evil were students of the god of smithing and technology. I don't think that's a coincidence. I don't think it's a coincidence that Sauron and Saruman both went rogue and decided this unspoiled nature you have here is nice and all, but I could make it better with machines.
I mean, that's the difference. Like the god of the smithing, like he created things, yes, but he created things that he needed, and he never really went so far as to make his creations would spoil the natural beauty of
No,
yeah.
and that's fair enough. I'm just saying that when all this is said and done, everyone should look over at Owley like, dude, I can't help but notice that all the Maiar that went over to Melkor's side, they come from your choir. So what the hell, man? And to be fair, um, the Valar are not perfect, and of the Valar that stayed good, quote unquote, Aule is probably the closest to Melkor in terms of attitude, which is funny because they hated each other. Um, Both because Aule was either smart enough or cynical enough to understand Melkor's evil before anyone else did, and he was the one that was like, "Manwë, don't forgive him because you're being stupid." Which is a good thing because someone needs to be smart enough to catch the evil bastard while he's being evil. But there's also a thing going in Tolkien where if a character is good enough or evil enough, they just fail to understand the other side. Like that was a standing thing, and that was part of the reason why Sauron was so easy to defeat at the end of the War of the Ring, was because he had gone so far into the evil territory that he just didn't understand the concept of good anymore. Like he was absolutely sure someone would try to use the ring against him because he just couldn't conceive of anyone being able to resist the call of power, or humble enough to refuse the call of power. So he always assumed that, of course, I don't need to station guards by Mount Doom because no one is gonna no one is actually going to try to destroy the ring. It's too powerful. Everyone likes using power, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, so regarding Sauron in in the show, like they show him as like some really big pressing threat, and he ends up being so. But considering that they literally just got done defeating Morgoth, who was 1,000 times worse than Sauron would ever be,
Yeah.
um,
Again, it's the difference between a fallen archangel or polytheistic god versus a fallen angel. Like they're fallen angels are bad, but a fallen archangel slash polytheistic god is much worse.
yeah. So, like, I really doubt that they would have such a sense of urgency, considering that they just beat someone better than him.
Yeah, it's like it's like why are we so worried about this two bit henchman when we just defeated the supervillain?
Yeah,
That's yeah. I know we all know why they're doing it. It's because well the books say that Sauron is the big bad, so we don't need to focus on this Melkor guy very much at all. And it's like you idiots. Sauron was dangerous because he was a henchman of Melkor. And this is the other thing. There was a short story or a essay that Tolkien did called Morgoth's Ring, and it's because um he wanted there to kind of be a symmetry between Sauron creating the One Ring and Melkor's attempts at evil. And the thing of it is, what he came up with was essentially the reason why Melkor doesn't have a ring is because his equivalent of the ring is woven into the fabric of reality, like literally woven into the earth itself, like the raw material of the universe. Because he he crafted his ring during the song and wove it throughout all reality instead of just making it one piece of jewelry. So even Sauron's most evil creation, the creation of the One Ring, pales in comparison to I literally corrupted every piece of matter in existence while
and
we were
that's
in the process of making it.
yeah, that's another thing I want to bring up. Like the creation of the Rings of Power. Like in the show, the elves are in the process of creating this like massive forge so they can create the Rings of Power. And like my question is, okay, then where the hell is Sauron?
Yeah,
Because the
where
Rings of Power were his idea to begin with.
yeah
He gave that idea to the elves.
where is Anatar the Lord of Gifts? Like he like this should be a very easy thing to do. You have the elves, smithing whatever they're smithing, and then along comes this guy by the name of Anatar the Lord of Gifts, and they don't know him, but he seems fine, and he comes up with this idea. Hey, Celebrimbor, have you ever thought about the idea of making magic rings? And then Celebrimbor eventually becomes convinced of like, oh, actually creating magic rings would be a good idea. Here, teach me how to make magic rings. And then of course the rest is history. But like they didn't even do the elves were good and then along came Anatar the Lord of Gifts to spoil all the again this idea that this is oh, god damn it. This is exactly why I don't want to be politically partisan or nothing, but this is exactly why this critical theorist, everything is a means to an end approach to art does not work for Tolkien. Because in Tolkien, he's already set up the sort of moral compass of his universe. And in the moral compass of his universe, unspoiled nature, wonder, and divinity are the good force, and nostalgia for those things are the good force. And the slow, monotonous corruption of those things by desires for progress, desires for efficiency, desire for technology, etc., is the bad force. And yet we find ourselves in a situation where the people who are making Rings of Power agree unironically with the bad guys and don't even realize that that's what they do, because in their mind it's unquestionable that progress is the good force and that nostalgia is the bad force, even though that's diametrically opposed to the world in which they're operating. Morality or no freaking morality, the mechanics of this universe require nostalgia to be the good force and progress to be the bad force.
Yeah, and I just want to mention this real quick. There were no black elves. There were no black dwarves. There were no black Numenorians.
Okay, well, let's actually address this whole thing, because whenever anyone makes this argument, someone immediately comes back with argle, flargle, blargle, racism, and so on. And here's the thing. My response to that is, if you want to tell a story about people of color in Middle Earth, they already exist. They're called the Easterlings, the men of the East. And operating within the social justice framework for 0.2 seconds, given that they love telling stories about oppressed people fighting their oppressors, the Easterlings would be perfect for a social justice story, because the Easterlings have been oppressed for many thousands of years by Morgoth, and so the Valar send in the two blue wizards, Alatar and Polando, to essentially act to inspire the men of the East who are resisting Melkor and Sauron. So if if they were actually interested in telling a social justice themed story within the context of Tolkien's Middle Earth, they would just tell the story of the Easterlings fighting against the influence of Melkor and Sauron, and the two blue wizards assisting them as essentially freedom fighters and ralliers, in the same way that Gandalf rallied the men of the West in the time of the War of the Ring. This would this would be a good story worth telling within Tolkien's mythos. It would give you an almost entirely people of color cast, and it would allow you to explore social justice themes within it. And
One thing I would disagree with. I don't believe it would be a good story because it would be made by people who are incapable of telling a good story.
well, okay, I'll grant you that. But what I'm saying is, if someone wanted to tell a good story and just happened to believe in social justice or social justice themes, the potential is there. They just needed to know about the few things that already existed, namely that the Easterlings are almost entirely people of color, and there's an oppressor oppressed story. And I tried to explain this to someone on Facebook once, because he was arguing, of course, that it's just racism and sexism. Why would it be anything other than racism and sexism? And I told this idea to him, and what he said to me made me face palm into my head. Like, I had this long response to him penned, but Facebook decided to delete it, and I just didn't want to type it all again. But he said, "Oh, so you're saying that people of color can only exist when you're telling a slavery story?" And I'm like, "Bitch, whenever social justicely inclined people get the opportunity to tell any story, no matter how inorganically it fits or not, they warp it into a slavery story. I mean, Wakanda, colonialism. A Nazi from American Gods season 2 onward, Black Lives Matter the character, and on and on and on. And you can span that out to every other social justice variety of things. So I had this moment with this guy where I'm like, so whenever whenever you're free to tell any story you want, you tell an oppressor oppressed story. But when an oppressor oppressed story is gift wrapped for you and handed to you on a silver platter, you find it restrictive. And I was just like, why? How could this possibly be this thing? Because it's like, whenever you have carte blanche to tell any story you want, you tell an oppressor oppressed story. When someone gives you in a Press or Oppress story, you shun it and are like, oh, so you're saying I'm only supposed to tell Press or Oppress stories, right? Well, you only ever want to tell an oppressed or oppressed story. So we're literally trying to accommodate your standards, and you're saying that our attempts to accommodate your standards are belittling and restricting, or something. It's
I think one of the reasons why they didn't write stories about the Easterlings is because they wanted the big name characters that people remember. Like they wanted to write about Galadriel and Doran and Elrond and Isildur because those are
which
names that people who are fans of Lord of the Rings will recognize.
which takes us back to the unironic Melkorism of the writers of Rings of Power. They don't want to make their own things. They just want to distort what already exists. Unironically. And also asterisk progress is a good thing, Gur. So again, what happens when Melkor is able to unironically make a version of Arda? Well, we actually now have confirmation of what happens. Because if you want to treat progress like it's the good force and you want to distort things that already exist, this is what you'll get. This is probably exactly why Eru didn't give Melkor the ability to create things, because he knew that this is what he would do with it. Uh, when the literal devil has the keys to create a new universe, folks.
Can we talk about the role reversal between Elrond and Galadriel? Elrond in the story was actually a warrior. He fought in the war against Sauron along with Isildur.
Yeah,
And
and it made sense because for one thing, Elrond is half elven, so him taking up a lower class position makes more sense. Whereas Galadriel has always been the eldritch sorceress who gets things done using her Fea.
yeah, and Galadriel always wanted to rule her own land. That's why we see her in the land of Lothlorien
Yes,
in the Lord of the Rings movie. That
Forest
was
of
actually
Lothlorien.
based. Yeah, that was actually based on, I believe, the Garden of Lorien in the uttermost west.
Yes, which was overseen by the Maya Melian, who actually was one of Galadriel's teachers and who taught her how to weave protection spells, basically. Which again, if you want to tell feminist themes, oh great social justice writers, I'm not sure how much I can be bothered doing your job for you, but if you want to tell a story with feminist themes, Galadriel's mentor was a female Maiar. Like the, again, the opportunity to tell a story that makes sense within the mythos that also has social justice themes is there for you on a silver platter, but instead of taking the opportunities that are given to you on a silver platter, you choose to distort things that already exist instead.
Yeah,
Melkorism.
so it makes no sense for Galadriel to be the warrior princess hunting down Sauron while Elrond is being the diplomat negotiating with Durin and the dwarves. Like those roles are completely reversed.
Yeah, because because Elrond is, for one thing, Elrond is half elven, so he's literally, like, I don't want to be mean or anything, but he's literally bad at everything the elves are typically good at by comparison. He's better than
He's
every
better than
single
men.
human to ever human, but he's nowhere near as good as any elf because he's half elven.
Let's see. Should we talk about the Harfoots, the pseudo hobbits that they forced?
No,
I
no,
mean,
okay.
literally
So,
forced
so,
into the
so,
story.
so this is the thing. The Harfoots do exist within the mythos, but as a kind of hobbit, not as a proto hobbit. Like, the Harfoots are like the largest ethnic group of hobbits, according to everything we know about the mythos.
Yeah, and people say the reasons why the Harfoots could be black is because they mentioned them being uh, of darker skin. That doesn't make them. That wouldn't make them look black. That would make them look like Mediterranean.
Or Celtic. Like it's meant to be a reference to the ancient Celts and the ancient Celts who had dark skin. But there's a difference between dark-skinned Celts or Mediterranean people and black people. Like, yes, they both had higher degrees of melanin than Caucasian Europeans, but they're still ethnically different that in exactly the same way that Mediterranean people and Middle Eastern people are ethnically different, or in exactly the same way that that Middle Eastern people and Asian people are ethnically different. No matter how many circumstantial similarities they are, they're still discernibly different ethnic groups. And hell, I don't want to be the guy that explains this because it's not my place. But even in African countries, there are different ethnicities within the overall like black sub subheader. That's why the Hutus and the Tutsis were at each other's throats during the Rwanda genocide, because while they were both African, they were of significantly different ethnic groups, because Africa is, of course, a giant ass continent, and just like on the European continent, there are different ethnicities out the wazoo. You take an entire continent of people, and you can't expect them to look all the same or be all the same, because genetic
Yeah,
diversity and all that. For
calling
all the
all
talk about diversity, it's funny how they like to group all of Africa as one ethnic group.
yeah, seeing all Africans are the same is like saying the French and the English are basically the same, and call an Englishman a Frenchman and see how far that gets you.
And it'd be like, well, I guess we have to fight a civil war again. Somebody called an Englishman a Frenchman.
But the
Oh,
thing,
Britannia, Britannia rode the waves. And meanwhile, the
but
French will be going, Allons de gens de la patrie. And then 1,000 years later, they're still fighting.
regarding the Harfoots, like they're not proto hobbits, and I don't even know if like the Hobbit kind was around in the I believe we're in the second age in this story. But here's the thing: even if they were, they wouldn't be part of the story because the hobbits weren't really involved with any of the big major events. That's what made the
But
Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit so unusual because hobbits were involved in
well,
them.
it's not just that it made it unusual. That's what gave hobbits the power to be involved in the Third Age, because due to the fact that they were these homebodied creatures who never really did much, and most people didn't know about, Sauron had a blind spot with regards to them, because he didn't. Number one, he didn't know that they existed, and number two, even if he did know they existed, he didn't really understand what drove them, because again, when you're as baked into the ideology of evil as Sauron is, you lose your ability to empathize with good. And just like the Valar were not able to understand that Melkor was lying when he apologized the first time, because they just were too good to understand the concept of good, except for Alway, which again makes me wonder. Somebody should be keeping an eye on Alway, is all I'm saying, because all the evil Maiar have come from his choir, and he's the only one that was able to empathize with Melkor's evil back in the day. So keep an eye on Alway, is all I'm saying. Um, but that's exactly the thing. The power that the hobbits have is literally that they're so simple and so unambitious. Like, they're so happy with their hearth, their home, and their simple pleasures, that they don't really have ambitions that can be twisted by the One Ring. That's why Bilbo was able to keep the One Ring for literally like 70 years without much issue. And the only reason why Frodo fell was because the ring was working overtime on him, basically.
Because Sauron was rising in power again.
Yeah, because before, the ring was basically just passively corrupting anything it could get its hands on. But when it realized that Sauron was awake, it made an active choice of like, okay, enough with the passive shit. The passive shit doesn't seem to be working. I'm getting my metaphorical hands dirty here. And even then, Frodo still outlasted every human male character and every elf and every dwarf. So, although although to be fair, of the other races, dwarves are probably the most likely to just be able to resist um the One Ring because they were given the seven dwarven rings and it didn't really do much other than make them slightly greedier because it's
Yeah.
literally the dwarves are literally made of rock, so it's literally trying to get a stone to be evil.
I mean, not only that, but you see that hobbits, their simplicity makes them like it's such a core part of their being that the ring can't corrupt it. Like
It just
Galadriel,
doesn't have anything to grab onto.
yeah,
It's
because
like
you see
I,
when Frodo
I'm
offered the
I'm
ring to
I'm look I'm
Galadriel,
looking for the ambitions that I can twist into evil malice things, and there just isn't enough here. Like there isn't. I I got nothing. There's no ambition here for me to twist. What the hell?
yeah,
That's
like
part of the
even
reason why I was
Galadriel,
so
which
confused when
would
Bilbo picked it up. It was like, what the fuck is this thing, and why does it not have any ambitions I could twist?
let me say something. Galadriel, when Frodo offered it to her, even she knew that if she accepted it, the ring would corrupt her. Like she
Yeah,
said that instead of a dark lord, you would have a dark queen. All would love me and despair.
yeah. All would fear me and love me and despair. Yeah. It, it
So like,
it it's because she has power and ambition and she knows how to use it. The hobbits, number one, don't really have much in the way of power or ambition, and even if they do, they don't really know how to use it in like this grand overarching. The closest to that you would have is someone like Bilbo or Frodo, and again, Bilbo was able to sit there with the ring passively corrupting him for 70 years and it didn't and he barely noticed it. And it was only when he took it up again when the ring was awake and was like, okay, enough with the slow pitch. I have to get her back home so my master can use me. So you have it. I'm going to drag ambition into you so I can pull it out of you again because I don't know how to deal with you otherwise.
but even then, he still had enough will to give it up when Gandalf revealed that it was corrupting him.
Yeah, it's like, oh, I see. I'm not really having a good day with this. Drop. God, that hurt, but now I can go on and do my thing.
Yeah, it's like real. It's like realizing you're starting to develop a drinking problem and then putting the bottle down.
Yeah.
It's difficult, but you're not too far gone that you can't do it.
And again, the only reason why it was faster with Frodo is because there's a difference between passively holding the thing and actively seeking to destroy it. Like it could the ring was basically freaking out because it could sense that Frodo was going to destroy it. And it was just like pulling out every single stop it could to find some way of making carrying it harder for Frodo. Also, Frodo was a lot younger than Bilbo when he first got it, so that probably had something to do with it, the whole youthful ambition thing.
Yeah, and I just want to mention like the hobbits like are sedentary people. Like they have like set homes in like the Shire, and there was like one or
Yeah,
two
not
other
anymore.
towns
In the
that could
Rings of
find them.
Power, they're Romani because they're wandering all over the place for no good reason.
Yeah, it's like none of this is hobbit behavior. Like,
I think they're trying to play with the idea that hobbits are like distant cousins of men. I think, which Tolkien does mention a couple times, but it literally amounts to nothing in the mythos except for now because we say so. Because because we have to tell a story about refugees wandering places and Romani and because everything is only a means to an end and only a surrogate for various demographic identities. It can't ever be a be a race or a mythos in and of itself, and characters can't ever exist as beings in and of themselves.
But the thing is, this can't have gone on for too long because Isildur is alive in this time, and we know that he eventually fights Sauron, defeats him, gets the One Ring, gets
That that
killed,
was
and
the
then
that was the other thing about Rings of Power that confused the living fuck out of me. They sped through like 2/3 of the Second Age already. Like
like
the Second Age was much longer than than this in the Silmarillion because it was like the entire line of Númenórean kings had existed before Isildur showed up. Like he
I
was the
mean, not
last.
only that, but Isildur is the founder of the nation of Gondor,
Yeah,
and so you have to think, okay, like if they're already making the rings of power, that means that Isildur would need to um, have the destruction of Numenor, you know, leave with his father and brothers, found Gondor and Andor,
and
and then raise.
that's the other thing. The like creation of the fall of Numenor and the creation of the Rings of Power were separated by like 200 or 300 years, if I remember correctly in the books.
It just makes no sense. Like you can't compress all these events into such close together because so many things need to happen before you get to,
Like
you know.
they tried to lampshade Melkor and Ungoliant destroying the two trees because it was referenced like in a flashback or montage in episode one, and then they just skipped over like 2 or 3 thousand years for no good reason other than, well, it's called the Rings of Power, so we obviously have. Guys, you could do basically what Lord of the Rings does, and like with the idea of the White Walkers, or what they should have done with the White Walkers, and have it be a slow progression from one thing to another, or like a better example of what this show should have been is the show Dark Crystal: Age of Resistance, um, which is a prequel to the Dark Crystal and talks about the fall of Gelfling society and the rise of the Skeksis and so on. Like, if you could have done something like that with Rings of Power, you could have had 5 or 6 seasons go by and then have uh, Anatar show up and obviously be Sauron and obviously the Rings of Power being made is a bad idea. Like you could have had that, but no. Instead of building up intrigue, instead of building up the world, instead of creating different factions and different houses and talking about the politics and the intrigue, like that incredibly successful show Game of Thrones did for almost a decade, we're just gonna skip to the important thing because we don't care about anything else. I guess.
Yeah, and one thing that I really don't understand is like the reason um for Galadriel's motivation. Like, okay, her brother dies. Yeah, but it's a war. Lots of people died. That wouldn't like make a complete like 180 of her entire personality. And two,
But
and two, why would she be the one to pick up her brother's sword? Because in the book, Galadriel has two brothers.
also, guys, again, I know I harp on this point too much, but to an elf, physical combat is primitive. So if she was going to fight Sauron, if not saying she should, but if she would fight him with her Feyre and with her words of command and with essentially her magic, just like she does in for all the faults of the Hobbit movies. There was a really awesome scene in in the Hobbit movies where it shows the White Council um banishing the shadow of Sauron from Dagaldor, and they kind of overplay their hand by having them see the eye ahead of time and so on, and that's stupid. But there is a scene where Galadriel just quietly walks in there, tries to reason with the orc, and is like, I have come for Mithrandir, and if you try to stop me, I will destroy you. And of course, the orc is too stupid to realize that its goose is cooked or just to let this happen, and it tries to lunge at her, and she waves her hand, and it explodes, and there's a giant like lightning flash of light that goes through the entire like the clouds around Doggeldor. And then when she realizes the shadow of Sauron is there, it's Galadriel who sacks up essentially, and she shines at him and speaks. And again, that is how an elf or a divine being within the context of Middle Earth fights. It's how Gandalf fights the Balrog. It's how Saruman and Gandalf fight each other. It's how um, Arwen fights Nazgul in Fellowship of the Ring, and it's how Galadriel fights Sauron in The Hobbit. Why the fuck did you turn this incredibly powerful sorceress who can destroy things by blinking into this myopic um Xena Warrior Princess or Buffy the Vampire Slayer copy?
And the thing is, even if she did take up the sword, like there are elves who are part of her company who've been training with swords literally for probably hundreds of years longer than she has after she just picked up her brothers. Why is she so much better than they are?
Well, okay, I can I'll give them this because Galadriel is one of the most powerful of the elves. So
Yeah,
I
but
can I can buy that if she decided to pick up a sword, she would be outclassing other elven warriors. I can buy that. But the problem is, especially now, especially in the Second Age, before she's had any opportunity to fade, she should be even stronger than she is in The Hobbit. Like, bef- back in there, you saw her literally turn an orc to ash by waving her hand at the thing. So now, given that this is in the Second Age before the elves started fading, she should be able to blink at the thing and it should fall over dead. But no, instead, we're going to turn her into a myopic. Like, it really feels like the reason is because their definition of strength is so myopic and primitive that they had to make her physically strong in order to make her powerful because they don't understand the idea that there are different kinds of power and different like hierarchies of power. So in order to make strong female character, you must literally make her physically strong. And it's like, no, her power is in like persuasion and manipulation, for one thing. For another thing, she's an incredibly powerful sorceress. And for a third thing, like she is a beauty so powerful that it inspired Feanor to create the Silmarils.
Yeah, and just the way that like she's shown in the show, like I get none of the ethereal beauty of Galadriel from that actress. I'm sure the actress is doing the best she can, but if I was Feanor, I would not be inspired to make the Silmarils by her.
It's because the writers want a feminist power fantasy, but they also think that the concept of traditional femininity is oppressive, and so they can't conceive of the idea that someone's power can be rooted in their femininity. So they have to remove Galadriel's femininity and give her myopic physical powers because they don't understand the idea that femininity and abstract power can exist, or that power rooted in femininity could exist. But anyway, we've been talking about Lord of the Rings for a while. We should also touch on some of the other franchises that have been um, occupied by the ideology of social justice lately.
Yeah, let's mention Star Wars for a brief bit. The franchise that's well, at least was near and dear to my heart. Um, Luke Skywalker, a character who has every trait of the traditional hero, believes in people, is strong willed, sees the good in people, even if it's buried under layers of darkness, redeemed his father, Darth Vader, and when faced with the prospect of his nephew possibly maybe being turned to darkness at some point in the future, decides maybe I should
Murder.
just kill him.
I did. I didn't want to kill my father, who had definitively murdered millions of people and including entire planets. I didn't want to kill the Emperor, who literally is the source of all evil in the context of this universe at this moment. But my own nephew has the potential to go evil as a child and hasn't done any of this evil stuff yet. Time to get out the lightsaber. Time to commit seppuku. It's not. But you don't even have to get into the specifics of the mythos to make this point, because here is I guess what you could call it is Dalton's law here. The stronger the value of a given piece of art is tied to either the Jungian approach or the Michelangelo approach of intrinsic value, the number one, the more the social justice subverters or moralists are going to try to obtain that thing, and two, the more noticeable and destructive the opposition will be as a result. Because you take Tolkien, who is literally pro nostalgia, anti progress within the context of the mythos, and you turn it into a social justice power fantasy, and it turns into trash. You take comic books, which are always rooted in classical heroism and pulp heroism and so on and so forth, and you subvert them, and they turn into trash. Um, you take uh, Star Wars, which is a love letter to pulp heroes and to specifically Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, and it it being subverted will be even more noticeable and will be even more destructive. The thing is, things that don't really lend themselves to heroism and or don't really lend themselves to like Jungian archetypalism wouldn't really be changed much by trying to be social justicized. But because these things are so rooted in older understandings of art, whether it be the Jungian approach or whether it be the Michelangelo inherent value approach, um, the subversion makes them valuable as tactical pawns for the moralistic social justice warriors, and also um, means that whatever warped carcass is going to be left from the results is going to be all the more twisted for having been the opposite of it to begin with.
Yeah, the problem I see with the people who make these types of revisionist media is that they only have two values, and they're the values of villains. They only believe in ego, their own ego, and power. They want people to see how great they are, and they want the ability to impose their will over other people and other things.
Okay, I will add something here that I see the issue is I see the issue, at least in part, is moralism, because you saw the same thing back in the day with tradcon evangelicals and the concept of family values. D&D is that D&D will make your kids worship the devil. Harry Potter will make your kids worship the devil. Rock and roll make your kids worship the devil, and on and on and on. And then, of course, you did see sometimes when um, people would make art specifically to be Christian propaganda or family values propaganda, and it was all insufferable crap because they're trying to prioritize morality over artistic quality. And I
Yeah,
do think and I do think
I
that's
have to say, even as a Christian, I do agree. A lot of that stuff was really bad.
I mean that doesn't mean that you can't tell the occasionally good story in that vein. Like Veggie Tales was pretty good, Passion of the Christ was pretty good.
Did you ever
Um
watch the movie The Ten Commandments?
uh the Caesar V. DeMille movie?
I believe so.
Yeah.
I think my parents showed me once when I was a kid. It was
Yeah.
good, but really freaking long.
Yeah, you can tell stories that have moral elements, but when you prioritize morality over artistic quality, or you assume that morality is equivalent to artistic quality, i.e., the more moral we make something, the better it will be, it will ultimately end up crashing and burning because there's a, there is a unsung truth that all artists are to some degree degenerates. And that is a bad thing, don't get me wrong, in some ways.
I mean,
But
hey, just look at Hollywood.
but there's also a positive aspect to that in the sense that I think to some degree artists need to be devoid of overt morality because artistic quality and moral quality aren't necessarily the same thing. And if you try to conflate them too much, you're going to wind up killing artistic quality in the name of morality. In order to create true art, I think in some ways you have to at the very least be able to understand that there are priorities other than moral quality that need to be concerned with art. Because otherwise you get the famous Christian rap where the old guy was saying like uh, Jesus Christ was his N word with a soft A, and how cringy that was, and of course the famous "How do you do, fellow kids" meme.
I feel like artists need to be able to push the envelope, but I also feel like we as a society should be able to say if they reach a point where it's like, no, you've gone too far.
I mean, yes, but what I'm saying is it's important to be able to separate moral quality from artistic quality. And I think as a result, you'll often see artists being more degenerate than you would um, entirely always be comfortable with. But there is there I feel like there should be a leeway where like some aspects of artistic depravity should just be a given. Like it's just it's just artists being artists, but there is a line somewhere. Like the difference between um the difference between Roman Polanski, for example, getting the Lifetime Achievement Award and Ezra Miller, for example. Like a lot of people hate me when I say this, but Roman Polanski deserved his award. The reason why is because the award was for his skill as an artist, not for his moral behavior.
You're right. Roman Polanski should have accepted the award. However, he should have done it from a jail cell.
I mean, yes, that's fair. That's fair as well. But what I'm saying is you can judge someone as an artist and you can judge someone as a moral person. But you have to always keep in mind that those are separate judgments you're making. Moral quality and artistic quality are not the same thing. They're non-overlapping magisteria. You can be the greatest artist who ever lived and an absolutely immoral person. And you can also be an entirely moral person without having an artistic bone in your body. They're not the same. You can also occasionally get away with telling moral stories, but the problem is when you when your goal is to tell moral stories first and good stories second, you get what you pay for. And I think the problem with modern day social justice is they think that because they were the ones that opposed the family values tradcons and the moralists of yesteryear, that means that they will always be in the right because they could see when the other side was going wrong. But the problem is the side you're on isn't the issue. The approach is the issue. The idea that my morality is so sacrosanct that it must infect every aspect of civilization and must have authoritarian carte blanche to control everything is the issue. Whether that's the family values tradcon screaming, "Won't somebody please think of the children?" or it's the social justice critical theorist Karens going, "Won't somebody please think of the insert demographic?"
Yeah, and that's why people like Tolkien and even like Stan Lee, were they are so beloved and their works are so beloved because they always put the story first. They always knew that weaving the story was paramount, and any societal views or moral values had to be secondary to the story itself.
And for another thing, and this is going to be controversial, I know, but this is exactly why Tolkien is better than C.S. Lewis. Because even though C.S. Lewis knew about the concept of moral busybodies, because everyone I assume in the anti-social justice community has heard the famous um, C.S. Lewis quote about moral busybodies. The problem with C.S. Lewis, though, I have, is he criticized moral busybodies while kind of also being one, because while the Chronicles of Narnia is probably the best Christian propaganda that's ever been written, aside from maybe the Bible itself, um, it still hammers Christianity into someone's head with a sledgehammer the size of a mountain. Whereas Tolkien was also a Christian, but he also saw value in things like pre-Christian paganism in the form of the Anglo-Saxon, Germanic, Celtic, and even to some extent the Arthurian legends. Like he did acknowledge that Christianity was valuable, but it also wasn't the only source of inspiration or the only source of value he had. He also, even in addition to all of those other influences, separated his influences from the thing itself. He was able to take influence from Beowulf or Arthur or the Norse sagas or the Bible without making it a one-to-one comparison. Whereas C.S. Lewis literally made Jesus a lion for the purposes of the story and literally had his characters referred to as the sons of Adam and daughters of Eve. And I'm sorry, but that is pure flex level of cringe. No matter how Christian you are, that is pure flex level of cringe.
I watched the movies and I enjoyed them. I haven't read the books. Maybe like I have them on audio, but I just haven't gotten to them yet.
I've read most of the books and I've seen the movies. I really like Lion the Witch in the Wardrobe, but again, I can't the heavy-handedness and the moralism of the direct one-to-one Christianity pulls me out of Narnia every time. It's like I really would like to enjoy this. If you had just done the basic bitch thing of the names and identities of these uh, forces are changed for the reasons of security. If you had just done that, I probably could enjoy this a lot more because I acknowledge that, especially in the Silmarillion, there's a lot of very, very unsubtle monotheism going on there with Eru Ilúvatar and Melkor and the Valar and so on. But even then, even though the Valar are definitely archangels, they also have aspects of polytheistic gods. And I think one of the benefits of Tolkien that C.S. Lewis missed out on is because he saw value in things other than just Christianity, he was able to add non-Christian things along with the Christian things and create something new and inherently meaningful in its own right, rather than just let me beat the Bible into you with a sledgehammer. Durr.
So you think the Chronicles of Narnia would have been better if Lewis had been more subtle in his allegories?
Well, I also think that Tolkien had it right when he very often in interviews would poo-poo the concept of allegories. Um, J.R.R. Tolkien is famous for having said repeatedly, whenever anyone would say, "Oh, I see, you were trying to make an allegory for this, that, and the other," he would respond with basically, "I hate allegories. I hate metaphors." And
So
frankly,
Tolkien would take inspiration from various sources, but he would always try and make them their own thing.
Yeah, and I think Tolkien had it right by saying I hate metaphors and I hate allegories. I hate symbolism. Because the thing is, I think we've lost the idea of in-universe logic. I mentioned this last week. We prioritize themes and narratives and one-dimensional answers to stories so much more now than we ever have throughout history, and I think it's crippled us in the ability to tell stories. I.e., just like our world is a three-dimensional world that stands on its own, any good story should also be a three-dimensional world with people in it that stand on their own. I think trying to make an entire universe a one-dimensional allegory is both crippling in terms of the quality of the art, but also just bad because it takes something wherein the value should be found in the thing itself and turns it into a tool to use rather than a thing to value for its own sake.
Yeah, I mean, I see what you mean. I mean, you see media nowadays, and like they try to be subtle about it, but it could be very obvious the thing that they're alluding to or pointing to the point where like it takes you out of the plot, and you like are more examining the story instead of
Yeah,
watching.
and it
Some,
also prevents stories from being multifaceted. If the author consciously goes in thinking I want to tell a story about this theme, and this theme is the only correct answer anyone can derive from this story, two things are going to happen. They're going to be successful in only telling a story about that theme, and the story is going to suffer for it. Or the author is going to be good enough that they don't know their own strength and actually create a story that's more complex than the theme they tried to go for, in which case people are going to take meanings from the story that are more meaningful than the story that was consciously told, but also equally as valid as the story that was consciously told. Or you'll have authors who don't force feed a theme in with a sledgehammer, like Todd Phillips' Joker, and therefore that story is going to work on multiple levels and is going to be three-dimensional. And rather than appreciating the fact that the story is multifaceted and works on multiple levels, you'll get critics whining that the author didn't tell me the one and only singular meaning I was supposed to take from this, therefore it must be bad art.
yeah,
It can't be that all those separate themes that other people see in it are all there and can coexist. It has to be that the person was muddled and didn't know what they were trying to say. Derp.
yeah, and also that's one thing that I don't like about modern day showrunners is that they're constantly telling people how to interpret the thing that they made. It used to be fun to like debate and discuss things and share our ideas, but when the people creating it actually come out and say, no, this is how you're supposed to view this thing, it takes the fun out of it.
Well, it also assumes that they know everything there is to know about the thing they made. And this is getting back to where we were last week, where I don't think authors entirely know everything about the worlds they make, because I don't think an author is or should be an interventionist god of the story they tell. I think their job is to be an explorer of their own world, basically to think of an idea and then to explore that idea like Lewis and Clark exploring the Louisiana Purchase, rather than an interventionist god who micromanages every last detail and therefore only what I say goes. Because I do think that a good artist is one that doesn't necessarily, like I say, know their own strength, i.e., they can tell a story thinking they're saying one thing, but because they're good artists, they actually tell a story that's more meaningful inherently than they were trying to tell. But if we devolve into this thing of the artist is the only one who gets to have an opinion on this, and any other interpretations are inherently invalid because I say so, then you're kind of going to lose that potential to tell a story and not notice that you told a story that's more meaningful than you intended to. I I think Neil Gaiman's approach to the Sandman is exactly this problem. Like I genuinely think, and again I'm metaphysically weird, so I'm well aware that this is woo, but I genuinely think that there is a real entity, call him Oneros, call him Hypnos, call him Somnus, call him whatever, but a real entity who is the embodiment of dreams, who inspired Neil Gaiman without Neil Gaiman's conscious awareness of it. And I think in so doing, there are aspects of Neil Gaiman's Sandman that work even though Neil Gaiman doesn't really fully understand why. And I think part of the reason why the adaptations of Neil Gaiman's Sandman have been so different and so much worse than the original comic is because he thinks he is the secret sauce that made Sandman good, when in actuality, a lot of the things that made Sandman good were the things that he didn't actually have control over, because he was the tool and the filter, not the interventionist god.
He's basically like an artist trying to like create a derivative of an art he made, but without the muse.
Yeah, the the he is still the same person, but the friends he had on the other side aren't there
I would
to
disagree. I don't
hold
think
his
he's.
hand anymore.
I would disagree that he's the same person. Time and
Well,
events
yeah, I mean,
changes.
I mean that is also a thing. Before he was young, hungry, and had everything to prove and everything to gain. Now he's an established writer who is frankly a little bit too up his own ass sometimes, because he
Uh,
allowed himself to believe that this great story I have didn't come from higher dimensions, even though my entire story is about how stories come from higher dimensions. It came from me and my ego, therefore I must be this great person. And I'm sorry to all the artists out there, but the fact that the fact that you can make great art does not make you a great person. The fact that you can make um, the fact that you made great art makes the art great, and that you were a good servant of that art. Your job as an artist is to serve the art, not to control it. Is in my opinion anyway. Again, I'm well aware that my approach to dealing with art is a lot more old school even than the Jungian approach, but we've lost something. We've lost the influence of the gods or the angels or the muses or however you want to put it, or even just um like the unconscious human intuition or independent spontaneous invention or platonic constructs or however you want to phrase it. Art comes from some a source that is not human, and artists being allowed to use their art as an ego trip rather than an excuse to be humble is very much a problem. And we can see the consequences of that problem in black and white and red everywhere in the art world today. So
uh, let's see.
regardless of the validity of my theories, the consequences speak for themselves.
Let's see. Ed Brewer had a comment. Break up families, put women to work. Let us raise your kids, remove independent thought and critical thinking. You both must come from strong families. Now, I don't want to speak about Dalton's situation, but me personally, I did my I we did have a family, but my parents ended up getting divorced when I was young, and things were never really as good as they were before that happened. So I guess my driving force in regards to that is I want to regain the kind of family that I had and then lost.
My situation, which I can speak to, my mom and dad actually never even got married. Um, my dad was my dad was dying of cancer, and my mom was actually 17 when she had me. My dad fortunately recovered from cancer, and also my mom got pregnant with me. And while obviously it would have been better if she hadn't gotten pregnant at 17, I'm kind of biased because it resulted in me existing. So there's that. And granted,
I think
I was
most people
premature.
enjoy being alive.
Yeah, I was premature, and I was born with at least one demonstrable physical disability and several other health quirks. So I'm well aware that I'm not a physical specimen or anything, and I have that there are parts of me that are damaged that probably wouldn't be damaged if the circumstances were such that I was in a I was born in a stable family. But my mom did eventually marry my stepdad, and I got two brothers out of the deal. Now, granted, both my father and my brother, or my stepfather, were kind of dicks. Um, not to put too fine a point on it. Someday, men and fatherhood might have to be a thing, so we can talk about the talk about that whole situation. But yeah, I can't speak to I can't speak to much of what Ed said. I will say I don't think traditionalism is a very good answer to um, deconstructionalism, because I think in many ways it tries to answer authoritarian moralism with authoritarian moralism, and I have problems with authoritarianism and moralism just in general, and double especially when they're together, when it's authoritarian moralism. I.e., I don't want to live in I don't want to live in the social justice utopia of San Angeles from Demolition Man, but I don't really want to live in Pleasantville or Stepford either, or Westview from WandaVision either. Like I my solution is and always will be the classical liberal stroke libertarian approach of screw both of your authoritarian moral systems, let people make individualistic choices.
Well, while I do view that strong families are a good thing because I used to have one. It's not. I believe that a lot of people would benefit from it, but it's not something that I would ever force on somebody else.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I worry slightly about they took our families, they took our it's exactly why it's exactly why the elves took our jobs thing is cringe. Well, if the only answer to everyone subverting everything we used to love is do a hard reset to the hardest core traditionalism we can, that's not that's not really an answer. That's being shot in the leg rather than being shot in the arm. I don't really at that point I call me crazy, but if the two choices are submit to hardcore traditionalism and family values or submit to social justice and critical theory, my answer is just how about no to either? Like I would rather not be shot in the leg or the arm. I'd rather not be shot at all if it's all the same to everyone else. Like there is a middle ground here, which is again humanistic, pluralistic, classical liberalism, stroke libertarianism, where everyone is an individual and can decide what is moral for themselves rather than being slaves to moralistic hierarchies.
Yeah, I like I said, as much as I believe what I believe, a more libertarian approach would be more ideal.
And I respect that you can hold those beliefs but not want to enforce them on anything. And I have plenty of beliefs of my own, believe me. But maybe part of it is because all my beliefs are so atypical, because I'm a stubborn asshole and I refuse to entertain false dichotomies. But I've always understood that even though I think I have a pretty good answer to life problems, I would never enforce those things onto people because honestly, authoritarianism in general is always nihilistic. I know the nihilism of social justice is far more overt than the nihilism of fundamentalism or traditionalism. But when you get right down to it, why do people feel the need to be authoritarian? They feel the need to be authoritarian because if we give people the freedom to choose, they make the wrong choice, and the wrong choice is preferable because people are either too weak, too immoral, or just too easily convinced to do the wrong thing. And I don't believe that. Granted, I don't believe the inverse of that either. I don't believe in this utopian concept whereby if we just let people do whatever they want all the time, it will be fine. But I think there's a case to be made through things like evolutionary psychology, um, universalistic secular morality like Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative or John Locke's classical liberalism that you can make the you can people have moral intuitions, and for the most part you don't need morality or you don't need strict morality and religion and ideologies to make you a good person. All that does is buying into the where the where modern day social justice has the issue of civilization makes people bad. Um, Old school traditionalism has the concept of original sin. I've never bought into the concept of original sin because it's the idea that people are inherently fallen and can only be redeemed by our chosen answer, by our chosen system, whether it's Christianity, whether it's Islam, whether it's Judaism, whether it's whatever. I don't believe that. I don't think you need enforced morality to make you a good person. I think most people are somewhere in the middle. And yeah, there are some people who are broken or twisted or will just make the bad choice. But maybe I'm naive, but I think the percentage of people who will actively choose, given all the other options, to make the wrong choice are a negligible amount of the population. And all you really need to counterbalance those guys is basic common sense structures that you can come to through basically any amount of thinking about it. You don't need lofty moral authorities to tell you what makes sense. Most of the time, evolution has figured it out so that we'll intuit those things on our own. And nature is a wonderful thing, and the fact that evolution exists means that it's always getting a little bit better or a little bit more acclimated to its circumstances. I think we should have a little bit of faith in humanity in general because we've been around for thousands of years before spoken language or written language were ever a thing, i.e., before we had um, any religion or any ideologies to speak of, and we still managed to be the most civilized animal on the planet so far that we're aware of. The dolphins might beat us though, because dolphins are very adorable creatures.
How many
Dolphin,
symphonies have they composed?
huh?
How many symphonies have they composed?
I mean, have you heard dolphins communicate with each other? They kind of sing to one another. So I don't know. They might just not have the capacity to write it down, but they I I do like maybe it's because I read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy at a formative age, but it wouldn't surprise me if dolphins did mentally compose symphonies and just not have the capacity to write them down.
Hmm. I, f- I feel like
Dolphin,
we've gotten so
dolphins
far
might
off.
be the elves. Dolphins might be the elves of our universe, actually.
I feel that we've gotten so far off topic, but
A
also
bit,
we've been going for damn near 2 hours, so I think this is a good place to call it.
yeah. I mean, we ultimately tied together this week and last week's episodes, so I mean, Synchronicity, yay.
So this has been a good stream. I've been Mr. E.
I've been Dalton Mortimer, the Authenticator, and we have been the Duality of Man. Cheers, guys.
Bye, everybody.